Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Portuguese Empire and the Safavid Empire. As well, from each empire, we'll highlight a specific leader. So from the Portuguese Empire, we'll highlight King João II. And from the Safavid Empire, we'll highlight Shah Abbas I. And at the end, we will have a comparison between the two leaders to hopefully learn a bit more about them and their respective empires. So without further ado, we will begin with the Portuguese Empire. So the Portuguese Empire was one of the longest-lived empires in history, and it rose to prominence in the early 15th century and gradually declined in the mid-20th century. Its history is marked by exploration, trade, military conquest, and a complex legacy of colonial rule. So for some background information, so the Portuguese Empire, also known as Portuguese Overseas or the Portuguese Colonial Empire or Imperio Colonial Português, was composed of the overseas colonies, factories, not modern factories, but sort of the colony such factories as they had at the times, and later overseas territories as well comprised to create this Portuguese Empire. Governed by the Kingdom of Portugal, it was one of the longest-lived colonial empires in European history, lasting 584 years from the conquest of Kuta or Suta in North Africa in 1415 to the transfer of sovereignty over Macau to China in 1999 or 1999. So, as this is actually perhaps the first colonial empire that we're covering directly, we've indirectly covered the Spanish empire, colonial empire, as it has affected some of our native or indigenous empires within the Americas. However, this is our first time addressing directly a colonial empire, so therefore making it the longest, as we can see from having the earlier start date. Furthermore, the empire began in the 15th century, and from the early 16th century it stretched across the globe with bases in Africa, North America, South America, and various regions of Asia and Oceania. So as for the rise of the Portuguese Empire, so we'll cover the rise and fall to do a similar structure to cover all the empires. So starting with the early exploration period from 1415 to 1498. Starting with Prince Henry the Navigator, a very famous historical figure, I hope, or I imagine many of you might know. The expansion under Prince Henry the Navigator, who sponsored expeditions along the African coast. He's highlighted in Age of Empires 3, which is a game that sort of inspired the title of this series. In 1415, the Portuguese captured Kuta, in North Africa, marking the start of its overseas expansion. So 1415, after it captured Kuta in North Africa, starts it as a colonial starts its colonial expansion and formally makes it an empire. As for the exploration of Africa, Portuguese explorers, motivated by the search of new trade routes, ventured further down the African coast. Notable milestones including the rounding of the Cape Bojador in 1434 and the discovery of Azores in Madeira. Bartolomé Dias and Vasco da Gama. In 1488, Bartolomé Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, opening the sea route to Asia. So very, very significant achievement in terms of exploration. That's Bartolomé Dias in 1488, rounding the Cape of Hope. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India, establishing a direct maritime route to Asia. So very, very significant achievements in terms of exploration and navigation. As for establishment of trade networks from the period 1498 to 1580, the Indian Ocean trade. So the Portuguese established a trading network in the Indian Ocean, capturing key ports like Goa in 1510, Malacca in 1511, and Hormuz in 1515. They controlled the spice trade and established a monopoly over critical maritime trade routes. So that's a sort of critical theme that we've seen of some of our most powerful empires, is getting a monopoly on trade routes. And this they had done in the Oceania region particularly, or not necessarily Oceania, pardon me, more the Indian Ocean region to begin with. As for their colonies in Brazil, so very, very significant, still large Portuguese influence. In 1500, Pedro Alvares Cabral claimed Brazil for Portugal. Cabral, or Cabral, pardon me. The colony became a significant source of sugar, gold, and later coffee, using enslaved labor from Africa. So sort of capitalizing on their current, so their maritime or colonial expansion in Africa, they allowed for their colonial expansion in Portugal to be more successful, taking slaves from Africa to facilitate their colonies in South America. As for the expansion in Africa and Asia, Portuguese fort and trading posts were established along the coast of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and China, including Macau in 1557. So also important trade routes are expanding from the Indian Ocean also now into Asia, or South Asia, and Southeast Asia as well. As for the height of the Portuguese Empire, in the 16th century, its dominance. So as for its naval power and trade, the Portuguese naval superiority allowed them to control key maritime routes and monopolize the spice trade from Asia to Europe. So monopoly was very important in its economy and further strengthening the metropole. The Casa de India, a royal trading house, managed the empire's commercial interests, so a very famous, important site in India. As for the cultural and religious impact of this empire, missionary efforts, particularly the Jesuits, spread Christianity and European culture in the colonies. So famous Jesuits were largely sourced from this Portuguese empire and spreading both religion and their respective influence, and to what extent they are separate. They established educational institutions and converted indigenous populations to their religion and into their culture. As for their union with Spain in 1580 to 1640, known as the Iberian Union. In 1580, the Portuguese crown was inherited by Philip II of Spain, so formally uniting the two crowns, leading to the Iberian Union. This period saw the decline of Portuguese autonomy and increased attacks on Portuguese territories by rival European powers, particularly the Dutch and the English. As for the Dutch and English encroachments, the Dutch seized key Portuguese holdings in the Indian Ocean, while the English established competing trade posts in Asia. So very other powerful colonial empires start to infringe and encroach upon their existing monopolies and powers and forts. As for the decline of the Portuguese Empire around this time, so in the 17th and the 18th century challenges. So the Restoration War, a very famous war in 1640, Portugal regained independence from Spain after the Portuguese Restoration War. The Treaty of Lisbon in 1668 reformed the empire again. So we do structure a rise and fall, but sometimes there's multiple peaks. So in this case, sort of they were essentially merged with Spain for a period, but then there was this Restoration War which reestablished the empire. So sometimes they do consider the first Portuguese Empire and a second Portuguese Empire, and they could be separated into two separate histories, both worthy of extreme amount of detail. As for the Treaty of Lisbon, was recognized the Portuguese sovereignty in 1668, but the empire had suffered significant losses, so still beyond its golden age. Further economic decline, competition from other European powers, and the loss of key territories weakened the Portuguese economy, and the focus shifted to the remaining colonies, particularly Brazil. So Brazil is still predominantly there's even a larger population of Portuguese speakers in Brazil today than there are in Portugal itself. Furthermore, in the 18th century, resurgence and decline. So the Brazilian gold rush further strengthened it as an asset, and also the Portuguese Empire more broadly. So the discovery of gold and diamonds in Brazil in the late 17th century and the early 18th centuries led to a brief economic revival. As for the Treaty of Methuen in 1703, a trade agreement with England favored English manufactured goods over Portuguese products, contributing to industrial stagnation in Portugal. So they started to maybe get the short end of the stick in terms of trading relations relative to the English as a result of this Treaty of Methuen. As for the Napoleonic Wars, further, the early 19th century saw the invasion of Portugal by Napoleon forces, so very, very significant effect. The Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil in 1807, so as we can see, Brazil was for a time at its capital, making Rio de Janeiro the temporary capital of the empire. As for independence movements and its final decline from the 19th century to the 20th century, so this is the earliest in history we've got in this series. As for Brazilian independence, so in 1822, Brazil declared independence, becoming the Empire of Brazil under Pope Emperor Pedro I, the son of the Portuguese king. So Brazil becomes independent, which could, in many ways, detracted significantly from the size and the population of the Portuguese Empire. As for colonial wars in Africa, Portugal struggled also to maintain control over parts of its African colonies, or the majority, or even all of its African colonies at this point, but in particular, Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, in the face of growing nationalist movements. As for decolonization, the Carnation Revolution in 1974, a military coup in Portugal, led to the rapid decolonization process. So as we saw, there were many external factors, for example, the independence of Brazil and nationalism within many of their African colonies, but ultimately there was an internal factor as well through this Carnation Revolution in 1974. The Portuguese Empire, by 1975, most Portuguese colonies in Africa had also gained independence, so we can no longer necessarily call it an empire. So as for the legacy of the Portuguese Empire left a profound cultural and linguistic legacy, still lasting today significantly. Portuguese is spoken by millions across several continents, and the cultural influences of the empire are evident in art and cultural and architecture in former colonies, and as well cuisine. The history of the empire is also marked by the exploitation and suffering of indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans, whose impact remains significant in post-colonial society. So there's still this impact of the treatment of certain of their colonial peoples, such as in Africa and the indigenous populations in South America. So very, very powerful, very, very significant empire. I think it would have been impossible to make this series without covering this, and we could have even divided into 50 episodes on each of maybe the first Portuguese Empire and the second Portuguese Empire, but we have to treat sort of each empire equally, so therefore that is the content we have for the Portuguese Empire. As for a specific leader to highlight, we'll highlight King João II, or João is John in Portuguese. So one of the most important rulers of the Portuguese Empire was King João II, also known as the Prince Perfect, or in Portuguese, O Príncipe Perfeito. His reign was a pivotal period in the Portuguese history, marked by significant achievements in exploration, centralization of power, and economic reforms. Therefore, as you find a biography of his life, I think a title is almost impossible to beat that in terms of title. Prince Perfect there's nothing better than perfect, or maybe best itself, but nonetheless. So for some background details, so John II, or João II, was born on the 3rd of March 1455, and he died on the 25th of October 1495. He was called Prince Perfect, once again, O Príncipe Perfeito, and he was King of Portugal from 1481 until his death in 1495, so not transferring the throne over within his lifetime as discussed by Gibbon in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, for example, and also was for a brief time in 1477. He is known for re-establishing the power of the Portuguese monarchy, reinvigorating the Portuguese economy, and renewing the country's exploration of Africa and Asia. So really manifesting a lot of the aspirations of the Portuguese Empire, and to maybe a perfect degree, as posterity has titled him. So as for his birth and family, so once again, born March 3rd, 1455 in Lisbon, Portugal, the capital. His parents were King Alfonso V of Portugal and Queen Isabella of Coimbra. Alfonso V, king, so maybe necessarily the best lineage one can get, at least within his own empire. And Isabella, the side plot is that Isabella was the first name of the first lady of Canada. As for royal lineage, João was part of the Abbas dynasty, which came to power during the crisis of 1383 to 1385, establishing a period of stability and growth for Portugal, so relatively successful dynasty within the Portuguese Empire, the Aziz dynasty. As for his education and training, João received a comprehensive education typical for royalty, focusing on administration, military tactics, and diplomacy. His upbringing prepared him for complex challenges of governance and exploration. It must be noted, not all of our most significant leaders have had this top-notch training fit for a king. Some have come from more humble beginnings. As for his ascension to the throne, but nonetheless, maybe this is one of the reasons why he's so perfect, is that his upbringing and everything from start to finish was pretty perfect. As for his ascension to the throne, or at least easy, or at least smooth, rather. As for his ascension to the throne, as for his his time as a prince and his early achievements with his regency during his father's reign, João proved himself as a capable leader. In 1471, he led a successful military campaign to capture Moroccan city Asila. So Morocco, and this was also Moroccan. We've seen they've had empires here before, so not an easy area of land to conquer. As for his marriage, in 1471, João married Leonor of Visso, strengthening his political alliances with the nobility. So not only did he come from the most royal lineage, he also married within a noble family too. As for becoming king, his ascension, João II ascended to the throne on August 28, 1481, following the death of his father, King Alfonso V. So once again, Gibbon discusses some of the merits of transitioning the ruler of an empire within the previous ruler's lifetime. This was not the case for Alfonso V, and will not be the case for João II either. As for his major achievements and reforms after becoming king, most notably his centralization of power, João II worked to reduce the power of the nobility, which had grown influential and sometimes rebellious during his father's reign. So we've seen this common theme across many of our successful leaders, at least in expanding their empires, have been centralization. He reasserted royal authority through a combination of political maneuvering and outright confrontation. As for execution of nobles as well, João's most notable act in this regard was the arrest and execution of Duke Fernando II of Braganza in 1484. These actions sent a clear message that the monarchy would not tolerate dissent. So maybe called perfect, because if you did not call him perfect, you might get killed, even if you were an important noble, a powerful noble, but not powerful enough in the eyes of João II. Or maybe too powerful, or to the point they need to be executed. As for exploration and maritime expansion, João II continued the work of Prince Henry the Navigator in his legacy, promoting exploration along the African coast and into the Atlantic Ocean. So once again, manifesting the spirits of this empire of exploration. As for the exploration of Africa in more detail, under his reign, explorers like Diego Chao reached the Congo River in 1482, and Bartolomeu Dias surrounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, proving a sea route to the Indian Ocean was possible. So very, very significant achievement and quite an eye-opening experience. As for the Treaty of Tordesillas, João II negotiated the Treaty of Tordesillas with Spain in 1494, which divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between Portugal and Spain. So that's why there's the dividing line essentially between Portuguese-speaking and Spanish-speaking in South America. So very, very significant point in history. Also a case study in sort of an alternative dispute resolution mechanism where a third party, the Catholic Church, negotiates the dispute. This treaty granted Portugal a significant portion of the New World, including Brazil. As for economic reforms, João II implemented significant economic reforms, including the improvement of the tax system and development of a robust maritime trade network. These reforms strengthened the Portuguese economy and further funded exploratory ventures. So, taxation, increasing taxes, of course, is a centralization motion, but also the fact that they have taxation is also a lack of decentralization, because there must be private enterprise to be taxed to begin with, unless it's only income tax, but that's not the case here. As for challenges and legacy, with domestic challenges to begin, despite his successes, Zhao II faced continuous challenges from nobility and had to navigate a complex domestic politics to maintain his authority. Perhaps that's why he had to execute some nobles, for example. His only son, Prince Alfonso, named after his father, and his father was already the fifth, died in a horse riding accident in 1491, creating a succession crisis. As for his death and succession, he died on October 25th, 1495, in Alvor, Portugal. With the death of his son, the succession passed to his cousin, Manuel I, who continued Zhao II's policies and further expanded the Portuguese Empire, but perhaps not the best succession planning if he had done, maybe, well, his son unfortunately died regardless, so that wouldn't solve the problem here. Maybe more children would have been the safer bet, but certainly there was likely reasons for this. As for his legacy, the impact on the Portuguese Empire. So Zhao II's reign is often considered the foundation of the Portuguese Golden Age. His centralization of power and promotion of exploration set the stage for a vast maritime empire that Portugal would become in the 16th century. The discoveries made under his rule opened new trade routes to India and the Far East, and even discovered it was accessible through the Cape of Good Hope, which would lead to an immense wealth and global influence in Portugal. As for the historical reputation, Zhao II is remembered as a strong and capable leader who decisively dealt with internal and external challenges. His epithet, Prince Perfect, reflects admiration for his effective government and visionary leadership, or perhaps it was even given to him out of fear. He is celebrated for his contributions to exploration, which not only embraced or enhanced Portugal's wealth, but also altered global trade and interaction. King Zhao II's reign was a turning point for Portugal, setting the groundwork for the empire that would influence global history for centuries. His efforts in exploration, centralization, economic reform were pivotal in establishing Portugal as a leading maritime power. So one of the reasons why we speak of the Portuguese Empire with such reference is perhaps in large part due to the influence or the manifestation of the values that Zhao II demonstrated. Also, for example, the division line that took place during his life between Spanish and Portuguese South America was extremely significant. The rounding of Cape Hope brought through his promotion of navigation very, very significant achievements. So, as for the content of the slide, the title, we have King Zhao II and the Portuguese Empire. It was one of the longest lived colonial empires, lasting from 584 years. From the conquest, hopefully that didn't wreck my sound. From the conquest of Sutat in North Africa to the transfer of sovereignty over Macau to China. It was composed of overseas colonies, factories, and territories. The significant leader was King Zhao II. The empire was Portuguese colonial empire. It was from the period of 1415 to 1999 CE, that's Common Era. Modern locations include Portugal, these are not in order, starting with the African nations, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea, Bissau, Cape Verde, Sao Tome, and Principe, that's one country, that's Tome and Principe. And the Indian subcontinent, we have India, Sri Lanka. In the Oceania, we have Malaysia, Indonesia. We have also Timor-Leste, China, in more maybe Eastern Asia or South Asia, Southeast Asia, but not necessarily Southeast Asia. We call maybe just East Asia. As we have Japan, Brazil in South America, Oman as well in the Middle East, Iran, Yemen, and Australia back in Oceania. So sorry that they jumped around. That was the way I was given the list, but nonetheless, they're very, very large empire. Million square kilometers is 5.5, very large. Our average empire size of only the largest empires that made the list was 1.14, so very, very large. But also maybe a maritime empire might be easier than some just maybe in, for example, some of the more densely populated regions, or perhaps maybe it's because maybe some of the regions that they captured were more the regions that were easy to capture necessarily, but nonetheless still a massive, massive territory. As for million square kilometers would be square miles equivalent would be 2.12. of the world would be 4.08%, excluding Antarctica. The capital was Lisbon from 1415 to 1808, and as well from 1821 to 1999, and Rio de Janeiro from the period when they had to flee during the Napoleonic Wars from 1808 to 1821. As for the government, it was a monarchy from 1415 to 1910, and it became a republic from 1910 to the end, 1999. As for the common languages, include Portuguese, what was the language of necessarily the language of the Portuguese Empire, and the religion was Catholicism, was the state religion, therefore allowing them to mediate the dispute in South America. And population, I'm surprised, is estimated to only have been 6 to 7 million. I guess it might have been larger, but that might just be necessarily the Portuguese people, not necessarily all the people that they ruled over within their colonies. But technologies have changed, but still, those regions today, 5.5 million square kilometers, include many, many more people. Brazil itself is magnitudes larger than this entire population estimate. But nonetheless, that's the information I was given. So, in the top left, we have a portrait of John II from the famous Navy Museum. To the right of that, we have the coat of arms of Portugal. Below that, we have the flag of the Kingdom of Portugal, which existed from 1830 to 1910, or at least the flag itself did. Below that, we have the flag of the Republic of Portugal from 1910 till this day. So that's currently the modern flag of Portugal. To the right of that, we have a map of Western Africa by Lazaro Luiz in 1563. The castle in the West Africa represents São Jorge de Mina, or Elima Castle. So we can see it's kind of just a beautiful map and something, in some ways, lost art map drawing. And very important during that time. And even they took pride in it, like they draw castles and make it detailed. A work of art as well. Below that, to the left, we have Vasco da Gama's departure to India in 1497. So we can see what their boats might look like. We have the big T, the big cross, and we can see the importance of navigation for the empire and see all the fanfare as people leave. And to the right of that, we have Portugal was the first European nation to establish the trade routes to Japan, with Japan and China. So therefore, showing we can see a Spanish ship arriving, and I believe that would be Japan in this image. A significant portion of the crews on Portugal's ships in the Japan voyage were Indian Christians as well. So as they went through India, they would recruit Indian Christians, or the Jesuits would convert them, for example, to Christianity, and then they would take them also on their ships and continue to Japan, for example. As for some summarized history, we have the conquest of Ceuta in 1415. The sea route to India was created in 1498. Colonial Brazil was produced in 1500 CE. The Iberian Union, where Spain and Portugal were united, was from 1580 to 1640. The Dutch-Portuguese War was in 1588 to 1654. The Portuguese Restoration War was 1640 to 1668, where they re-separated from Spain. The end of the Moroccan territories was in 1769. The independence of Brazil was in 1822, a massive blow to the size of the Portuguese Empire. The loss of the Indian provinces was in 1961. CE, the Portuguese Colonial War was in 1961 to 1974. The Carnation Revolution was 1974 to 1975, and the handover of Macau was in 1999. The empire was preceded by the Kingdom of Portugal, the indigenous peoples of America, the Kingdom of Congo, the Kingdom of Matuapa, the Sultanate of Kiwa, the Kingdom of Maravi, the Kabu, the pre-colonial Timor, the Ming Dynasty, the Gujarat, the Sultanate, the Kingdom of Kotte, the Jaffna Kingdom, the Malacca Sultanate, the Sultanate of Bijapur, the parts of the Viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata, Maratha Confederacy, the Ahmednagar Sultanate, the Meerinid Sultanate, and the Wattasid Dynasty. So many, many regions that they ultimately came to rule over in at least parts. And it was succeeded by the Portuguese Republic, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, Sao Tome and Principe, East Timor from 1709 975 to 1976, Macau Free Dadra and Navgar, Haveli, India, Dutch Ceylon, Dutch East Indies, Fort of Sao João, Baptiste de Ajuda, Spanish Guinea, and Dutch Malacca. So many places came to fill the large void that came after its eventual decline. And in the top right, unfortunately, we don't have any names on it, but we can see all these red regions are the extent, or the regions that the Portuguese Empire ruled in. So many continents: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and Oceania. So very, very significant and very, very important empire. So as for the Safavid Empire, so the Safavid Empire was one of the most significant dynasties in Persian history, ruled from 1501 to 1736. Its rise and fall encapsulate a period of remarkable cultural, religious, and political transformation in Iran and the broader region. Therefore, we'll seek to find in our normal structure the rise and fall of this empire. So for some further background information, so the Safavid Iran, or the Safavid Persia, also referred to as the Safavid Empire, was one of the largest and longest standing Iranian empires after the 7th century Muslim conquest of Persia. So this is a region we've really covered many empires. We've had Persian empires, we've had many Iranian empires, and now this is considered the first Iranian empire in the modern period, after the Muslim conquest of Persia, which was ruled from 1501 to 1736 by the Safavid dynasty. So hence the name Safavid Empire, Safavid dynasty, who ruled over them. It is often considered the beginning of modern Iranian history, as well as one of the gunpowder empires. The gunpowder empires were the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Safavid Empire. So empires that were Muslim, for example, and they also had guns, was a term coined for it, and this was one of them. So as for the Safavid, further information, the Safavid Shah Ismail I established the Twelver denomination of Shi'a Islam as the official religion of the empire, making one of the most important turning points in the history of Islam. So establishing a very, very significant sect, Twelver Shi'a Islam, as the official religion, which is still a very, very prominent sect of Islam. So as for the rise of the Safavid Empire, starting with the origins and early history. So Sufi origins. So the Safavid dynasty originated from Safaviya, a Sufi order formed by Sheikh Safi al-Din Arabili in 1252 to 1334 in Arabil in northwest Iran. This order gradually became a more militant and politically ambitious under its later leaders. So sort of this order formed, which ultimately was led by a dynasty, which started to formulate ultimately into an empire. So this is sort of a unique start to an empire, starting from like an order. We've seen some came from, we've even seen empires come out of slaves, for example, but this is coming out of an order, very unique. So as for Sheikh Junaid and Sheikh Haidar, so the transformation of the Safaviya from a spiritual to a military force began under Sheikh Junaid. So it must begin that this order began as a religious unit, but it wasn't necessarily militaristic. And it was this Sheikh Junaid from 1447 to 1460, and his son Sheikh Haidar, who reigned from 1460 to 1488, and they combined Sufi mysticism with Shia Islam and built the loyal following among the Turkic tribes. So Ismail I, a very fascinating name. It's kind of an Old Testament name. Ismail is kind of a tragic character as well. But I'm not sure necessarily what the connection is here, but nonetheless a very, very fascinating and unique name. It's also the protagonist of Moby Dick, very carefully chosen. So Ismail I and the establishment of the empire from 1501 to 1524. Ismail I declared himself, the descendant of Sheikh Safi al-Din, declared himself Shah of Iran. So Shah is like the king. After capturing Tabriz, at only 14 years old, he established the Twelver Shia Islam as the state religion, a move that would shape the identity of Iran. So supposedly, even at the age of 14, causing very significant religious shift that still has an effect today. As for consolidation of power, Ismail I expanded the territory rapidly, defeating Koyunlu, capturing Baghdad, and extending his rule over much of modern-day Iran, Iraq, and parts of the Caucasus. As for religious transformation, Ismail's enforcement of Shia Islam unified his empire religiously and culturally. As we've seen, many of the empires previously have been Sunni, with the exception, for example, of the Fatimid Caliphate, but also led to conflict with predominantly Sunni Ottoman empires. The Ottoman Empire was Sunni, so very big clash necessarily between the two sects of Islam, the two major sects of Islam. As for Tahmasp I and stabilization from 1524 to 1576, starting with internal struggles. So following Ismail's death, his son Tahmasp I faced challenges from Kuzilbash, which was Turkic tribal warriors who faced challenges, or who were key supporters of the Safavids and other internal factions. So this Turkic tribal warriors allegedly faced challenges, provided challenges to the son of Ismail, Tahmasp I. As for Ottoman and Uzbek conflicts, Tahmasp dealt with continuous warfare against the Ottomans, who were Sunni in the west, and the Uzbeks in the east, managing to stabilize the empire through military and diplomatic efforts. So nonetheless, Tahmasp was largely successful despite the strength of the Ottoman Empire, as we shall see, one of the most significant empires throughout all of history. As for cultural flourishing, despite these conflicts, Tahmasp's reign saw significant cultural achievements, including advancements in art and architecture. As for the height of the Safavid Empire, under Abbas I, who is the leader we'll highlight specifically, so this period from 1588 to 1629, starting with reforms and centralization, once again very key for many of our most successful empires, centralization. Or necessarily maybe an empire is the manifestation of some form of centralization, so much centralization it extends. Shah Abbas I, also known as Abbas the Great, many have borne that title, the Great, but it's still a great thing to achieve, is considered the greatest Safavid ruler, and we'll highlight in a specific biography. He reformed the military by creating a standing army and reducing the power of Kizilbash, so once again those Turkic tribal warriors. He also centralized administration and reducing the influence of tribal chiefs. So very, very significant achievements under his own life. As for economic development, Abbas I moved the capital to Isfahan, transforming it into one of the most beautiful cities in this world, a place I'd be very grateful to visit someday. He promoted trade and commerce, fostering relations with European nations, and improving infrastructure. As for his military conquests, Abbas I regained lost territories from the Ottoman and Uzbeks as well, including Baghdad, parts of the Caucasus, and the Persian Gulf, enhancing the empire's territorial expanse and influence. One thing on him changing the capital is maybe that he didn't found the empire, but to move the capital is in some ways really reshaping an empire. Furthermore, as for the decline, however, of the Safavid Empire, more to come on Shah Abbas I in his specific biography. So post Abbas I and decline from 1629 to 1722 CE, with weak successors. So after Abbas I's death, his successors lacked his vision and competence, and therefore internal strife, corruption, and the reassertion of Kizilbash power weakened the central authority. So once again, loss of centralization is also a sign of decline, or a symptom, or maybe a cause of even decline. And maybe also from Shah Abbas I, maybe he could have been better in his making sure his succession was better laid out. So maybe maybe he wasn't so perfect, but maybe it wasn't his fault. Maybe it was all his descendants, or maybe it was his successors that failed him, or failed his legacy. As for external threats, also contributing to the decline of this empire, the Ottomans and Uzbeks continued to be a threat. Additionally, Afghan tribes began to rebel against the Safavid rule, leading to significant instability. So the Afghan, as well, very significant war forces throughout history. As for the fall of Isfahan and the Afghan invasion in 1722, Mahmud Hotak. So in 1722, Mahmud Hotak, the leader of Ghilzai Afghan tribes, besieged and captured Isfahan, the capital, effectively ending the Safavid rule. The last Safavid ruler, Shah Sultan Hussein, was taken prisoner, so even perhaps didn't even necessarily go as a martyr at that point. He was even taken as captured. But nonetheless, there was a brief revival. Nadir Shah, a military leader, briefly restored Safavid rule by installing a puppet Safavid monarch in 1736. So as we saw, for example, or under Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, there were times when the emperor was even captured, but the empire still lasted. But the reign was marked by the end of the genuine Safavid sovereignty. So a sort of puppet ruler, and even ruled by necessarily another power. As for the legacy of the Safavid Empire, starting with cultural and religious impact. So Shi'a Islam, with a very significant impact. So the Safavid Empire's promotion of 12-verse Shi'a Islam as the state religion had a lasting impact, making Iran predominantly Shi'a country today. So Iran is Shi'a, which makes it unique in terms of the Middle East relative to Sunni nations, and creating religious identity that endures to this day. So this very significant achievement, or very significant influence of this empire. As for art and architecture, the Safavids were great patrons of the arts, leading to a golden age in Persian culture. Isfahan, with its great mosques, palaces, and bridges, remains a testament to the architectural achievements. Further, as for Persian identity, the Safavids helped shape a distinct Persian identity, blending Persian cultural elements with Shia Islam, which influenced the region's political and cultural development. As for political fragmentation, after the fall of the Safavid Empire, Iran experienced a period of fragmentation and foreign invasions. However, the Safavid legacy continued to influence the region's politics and culture, setting the stage for the emergence of the later Iranian dynasties, as we shall cover. Our history of Iran has still not finished. The Safavid Empire was a pivotal force in the Middle Eastern history, marking a significant era in the cultural renaissance as well. Religious consolidation and political power of Iran. Its rise and fall illustrates the complexities of empire building and the interplay between religion and politics, and the enduring impact of cultural and administrative innovations. So, as to highlight a specific leader, we have Shah Abbas I. The most important ruler, perhaps, of the Safavid Empire was Shah Abbas I, also known as Abbas the Great. So, not everyone gets to have this great title, the Great. His reign from 1588 to 1629 marked the zenith of the Safavid power, so a great achievement to be at the top, but that necessarily means maybe he wasn't the best at confirming his succession, or his posterity, or his legacy. His reign from therefore we need to find a biography of his life. So, for some further background details, so Abbas I was born on the 27th of January, 1571, and died on the 19th of January, 1629, so just before his birthday, commonly known as Abbas the Great, or Abbas-i-Bozorg, and he was the fifth Shah of the Safavid Iran, from 1588 to 1629, so the fifth Shah, the third son of Shah Muhammad Kodabanda. He is generally considered one of the greatest rulers of Iranian history and the Safavid dynasty. So, as for his early life and ascension to the throne, with his birth and family background, so he was born once again the 27th of January, 1571, in Herat, then part of the Safavid Empire, so within the regions of the empire, but not in the capital at the time. Maybe, and that's why he also was interested in moving the capital, maybe, as we shall see. His parents were Shah Muhammad Kodabanda, so his father was the Shah, so that's maybe the best lineage one can get in the region, and Khair, or at least the most smooth to coming to power, and Khair al-Nisa Begum. His father was a weak ruler, however, and his mother was a powerful figure in court politics, so perhaps a family with a strong matriarchal figure maybe influenced his life. As for his lineage, Shah Abbas, maybe a parallel we could see with Napoleon. I think his mother was a stronger figure in his family. As for his lineage, Shah Abbas I belonged to the Safavid dynasty, so the royal family, which claimed a descent from the Sufi order, which by Sheikh Safi al-Din al-Arabali, so therefore the coming from the order that formulated the Safavid dynasty that also ultimately became militaristic. As for his early years in political turmoil, starting with his turmoil and captivity, Abbas's early years were marked by political instability. His father's reign was challenged by internal strife and external threats from Ottomans and Uzbeks, but was effectively a hostage under the control of the powerful Kuzibash tribes. As for his ascension to the throne, so there's these political turmoil and these threatening tribes, for example, but nonetheless he ascends to the throne, seizing power in 1588 with the support of loyal Kizilbash. So the Kizilbash factions were supporting him. Abbas deposed his father and ascended to the throne. So, but however, although he came and he could have got the throne himself, he killed his own father. If he had to, maybe he was just pure evil. His early years as Shah were dedicated to the consolidating his power and dealing with internal factionalism. They say his father was weak, so maybe he did it to save his empire, or save the empire. As for his reforms and achievements, starting with his centralization of power, with his military reforms. So Abbas I reformed the Safavid military, reducing the influence of the Kizilbash by creating a standing army composed of converted Christian slaves, or known as gulams, so standing army, but necessarily separate from the Kizilbash factions, and loyal Persian soldiers. This reduced the dependence on tribal militias and increased the effectiveness of his military, so decreasing his dependence on these factions. As for his administrative reforms, he centralized the administration, curbing the power of the regional governors and tribal chiefs. Abbas implemented a bureaucratic system that ensured loyalty to the Shah and efficient government, so very, very common theme of centralization. As for his administrative reforms, he centralized administration, curbing the power of regional governors and tribal chiefs. Abbas implemented a bureaucratic system that ensured loyalty to the Shah and efficient government. As for his revitalizing of the economy, Abbas I, causing it to be a golden age economically as well, Abbas I focused on reviving the empire's economy by promoting trade and industry. He established trade routes, built caravan routes, and protected caravans to encourage commerce. So by protecting trade, very common theme apparently in Blackstone's commentaries to the laws of England, one of the reasons why the English colony or English empire got so powerful was because they, in their earliest laws, they protected traders. So, and that therefore, if people felt safe trading within the Safavid empire, it's good for their own economy, perhaps. As for relations with Europe, he fostered trade relations with European powers, particularly England and the Netherlands. The silk trade became a significant source of revenue for the empire. As for urban development and cultural patronage, the capital and urban development, so Abbas moved the capital from Kazvin to Isfahan in 1598, so moving the capital, transforming it into one of the most magnificent cities at the time. He commissioned the construction of numerous architectural masterpieces, including mosques, palaces, bridges, and bazaars. I would say this architecture is also, in some ways, invigorates the economy. People debate this, that building buildings doesn't invigorate the economy, but I do believe it does. But nonetheless, if anything, it inspires people and maybe even creates fear or admiration from their enemies or adversaries, or admiration also from their friends too. As for his cultural patronage, Shah Abbas was a great patron of the arts, architecture, painting, carpet weaving, and calligraphy. Isfahan became a cultural hub, attracting artists and scholars from across the region. As for military campaigns and territorial expansion, campaigns against the Ottomans. So Abbas I successfully waged war against the significant Ottoman Empire, recapturing territories lost during his father's reign. So his father allegedly was weak, and maybe that's why he had to take him, kill him, and take him, to throw him to take back this territory from the Ottomans, or maybe the people wanted this, including Tabriz, its former capital even, Baghdad, and the Caucasus. As for defeating the Uzbeks as well, so he defeated the Uzbeks in the east, securing Khorasan and ensuring the safety of the eastern borders. So very, very significant achievements in terms of two very, very formidable threats or enemies. As for the Persian Gulf dominance, Abbas secured the Persian Gulf by capturing the Portuguese-held island of Hormuz in 1622. There's a connection with the Portuguese Empire we just covered, with the help of the English East India Company, enhancing Persian control of the region's trade routes, also showing their relationship with a European power in a positive sense through the East India Trading Company to help them fight against the Portuguese. As for the personal life and legacy, his personal traits and governance style. So with his leadership, Abbas I was known for his pragmatism, strategic acumen, and ruthlessness when necessary, even killing his own father. He was a hands-on ruler, often personally overseeing military campaigns and administrative matters, so perhaps a foil character or the opposite of his father. As for his cultural and religious policies, while a devout Shia Muslim, Abbas adopted a pragmatic approach to religion, promoting tolerance and protecting religious minorities such as Christians and Jews to foster trade and diplomacy. For example, some of his standing army was even from converted Christians, or loyal Christians at least. As for his death and succession, however, Shah Abbas I died on January 19, 1629 in Mazandaran, Persia. His succession, he was succeeded by his grandson, Safi Mirza, who took the throne as Shah Safavid. The successors of Abbas I, however, lacked the competence and vision, leading to the gradual decline of the Safavid Empire. So maybe they kind of returned to his father, and maybe he was sort of a shining period in terms of success. But can you ever justify killing one's own father? It's hard to say. But I think perhaps. But there's a very, very high threshold. As for his cultural legacy, as for his cultural and architectural legacy, Shah Abbas's contributions to Persian architecture, then urban development, left a lasting and enduring legacy. The city of Isfahan, with its stunning buildings such as the Imam Mosque, Sheikh Lofala Mosque, and the Ali Kapu Palace, remains testament to his patronage of a city I'd very much like to visit someday. The flourishing of Persian arts during his reign had a lasting impact on Persian culture and contributed significantly to the cultural heritage of the Islamic world. As for political and economic impact, Abbas's centralization efforts and military reforms strengthened the Safavid state, making it a formidable power in the region. His economic policies revitalized the Persian economy and established trade networks that connected Persia with Europe and Asia. So know how to trade, know how to also defeat some of the most formidable enemies in the region, and empires as well, colonial empires such as the Portuguese as well, in certain areas. Despite the decline following his reign, Abbas's reforms and achievements set a high standard for governance and cultural patronage in Persia, hence giving him the name Shah Abbas I the Great. As for his historical reputation, Shah Abbas I is remembered as one of the greatest rulers in Persian history. His reign marked the peak of Safavid power and influence, and his legacy continues to be celebrated for its contributions to Persian culture, architecture, and statecraft, therefore once again manifesting perhaps the ideals of the empire itself. Shah Abbas I's reign was a transformative period in the Persian history, characterized by military prowess, economic revitalization, and cultural flourishing. His leadership and vision solidified the Safavid Empire's place as a major power in the Islamic world and left a lasting legacy that continues to influence Iranian culture and identity, not to mention establishing the sect of Islam that is still in the region today. So, as for the content of the slide, so we have the title, Shah Abbas I and the Safavid Empire. It was one of the largest and long-standing Iranian empires after the Muslim conquest of Persia. It was considered the beginning of modern Iranian history and a gunpowder empire. Significant leader was Shah Abbas I. The empire was Safavid Iran. The period was 1501 to 1736 CE Common Era, also known as the Early Modern Period. Modern locations include Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Uzbekistan. It must be noted they do not include all of these entire countries, but nonetheless at least regions within all those countries at one point or another. Million square kilometers would be 2.9, so very, very significant. Our average empire size of largest empires is 1.14. For example, even Athens and Sparta, we squeezed into this list and they're not even 0.1%. million square miles is 1.12, and also must be noted there have been many empires that have existed in this region before, so it's one of the most, probably maybe the most difficult million square kilometers to rule over. Percent of the world would be 2.15%, excluding Antarctica. Capital was Tabriz, pardon me for the capital for bowling that word, but the capital was first Tabriz from 1501 to 1555, Kazvin from 1555 to 1598, and Isfahan from 1598 to 1736, as established by Shah Abbas I. The government was a monarchy. The common languages included Persian, Azerbaijani, Georgian, Circassian, and Armenian. Religion was Twelver Shi'a Islam, the official religion, still prominent in the region today. And the population was between 8 and 10 millions, so still significantly less than the population today, maybe similar to the estimates for the Portuguese Empire. I personally think it might have been higher, but that's the data I've been given. In the top left, we have Shah Abbas I in the 16th or 17th century portrait. To the right of that, we have in Arabic script, expansion realm of Iran, which is another name for the Safavid Empire, expansive realm of Iran, or in Iranian text or Persian text. As to the right of that, we have the flag of the Safavid Empire from 1576 to 1732. This flag really resonates with me. My astrological sign is Leo, sun sign, and also green is one of my favorite colors, so it really resonates with me. Below that, we have Ismail declares himself Shah by entering Tabriz, his troops in front of Arg of Tabriz. A painter, Shingiz Meybeliev. It's a private collection, very, very gallant, successful achievement. And Ismail, I also think, is in the Old Testament quite a tragic name as well, or a very sad name, or a difficult name, protagonist name perhaps even. But there's also multiple Ismails as well in the Old Testament, at least 2 that I've identified so far. And I'm almost done. Below that, we have the Abbas depicted as a new Caesar being honored by trumpets of fame, together with the 1609 to 1615 Persian embassy in the Allegorie de l'Occasion by Franz II Frankenstein in 1628. So depicted like a Caesar, and he's considered Abbas I the Great, for example. But that's maybe more of an Alexander the Great, but there were even the greats before. Cyrus the Great, for example. But nonetheless, in this image, he's depicted like a Caesar-like figure, but also showing the worship we still even see of this time of Caesar himself, and the Caesars, plurals, because there were many Caesars during the Roman Empire after Julius Caesar, of course. And for a time it was sort of the second in line to the throne, Caesar, and then they become Augustus for periods of the Roman Empire. Not to go on too much of a tangent. To the right of that, we have a karkan, which is a tool for punishment of state criminals. So very, very humiliating and very, very restrictive. We can get a depiction of what the laws might have been like back then, or the rigidity of the laws. I think today imprisonment exists, of course, but I don't think it would be permitted to force somebody to wear something like that. Well, people are forced to wear handcuffs, so maybe it is analogous. And to the right of that, we have a 19th century drawing of Isfahan, the beautiful, beautiful city in Iran that I'd someday like to visit. Below that, we have that the empire was preceded by Ak-Kuyanlu, the Afrasiab dynasty, the Timurid Empire, important empire we've covered, the Mirabanids, the Shirvanshah, the Karkia dynasty, the Marashis, and the Baduspanids, pardon me for my pronunciation, and succeeded by the Afsharid Iran, the Hotek dynasty, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, many of which we'll cover indirectly or directly in episodes to come. In the top right, we have the massive extent of the Safavid Empire, 2.9 million square kilometers, and very difficult. We have the Mughals over here to the east. We have the Ottoman Empire over here to the west, the Russian Kingdom up here. We have the Khanate of Khiva as well, the Nogay Horde, the Khazar Khanate, and the Arabian tribes as well over here. Oman was also a significant force as well. So, as for a comparison between these two great leaders, King João II of the Portuguese Empire and Shah Abbas I of the Safavid Empire. So King João II of the Portuguese Empire and Shah Abbas I of the Safavid Empire were both pivotal rulers in their respective regions, each significantly shaping the future of their empires. While there are numerous similarities to their approaches to centralizing power and reforming their states, their contexts, methods, and impacts were distinct. Therefore, we'll seek to compare and contrast these two influential monarchs. So as for similarities, starting with their consolidation of power. So João II focused on diminishing the power of the nobility to strengthen the monarchy, for example, even notably killing a significant noble. By executing powerful nobles and confiscating their lands, he reinforced the authority of the crown and reduced the influence of feudal lands. As for Abbas I, Abbas I reduced the power of the Kisbelash tribal leaders, who had become too powerful and posed a threat to central authority, but even in some ways brought him to power. He created a standing army composed of loyal gulams, converted Christian slaves, and Persian soldiers to diminish the reliance on Kisbelash. So both of them sort of suppressing the nobility, which is something that in Alexis de Tocqueville's On the Old Regime of the French Revolution is something to be perhaps feared, is because the nobles are perhaps the moat of the in terms of a metaphor, the moat around the king himself. But nonetheless, both of them engaged in this, decreasing the power. But in one case it was the nobles, but in one case it was the Kisbelash, who are tribal leaders. So in some extent different, but I think they're both analogously nobles, or at least aristocrats. As for their similarities in terms of military reforms, João II reconstructed the military by enhancing the navy, which was crucial for Portugal's expansion and control over the maritime empire, really manifesting what the Portuguese Empire itself was, and Henry the Navigator's legacy. His efforts led to the establishment of a powerful naval force that could protect and expand Portuguese interests. As for Abbas I's military reforms included the establishment of a standing army, the use of gunpowder weapons, and the creation of loyal military force independent from tribal alliances. These reforms were crucial in his successful campaigns against the Ottomans and Uzbeks. So both of them very much made significant reforms in terms of their military endeavors. They are very, very much different, whereas one was more focused on naval enterprises, one was more focused on their standing army and their degree of independence from the tribal leaders. As for economic reforms, João II implemented economic reforms to enhance the wealth of the Portuguese state. His focus on exploration, securing trade routes, led to establishment of a profitable space trade network, boosting the economy. As for Abbas I revitalized the economy through trade and commerce, establishing trade routes, building infrastructure like caravansaries, like very difficult to pronounce for me, but routes for caravans, and fostering relationships with European nations. So, for example, with the East India Trade Company. His efforts in capturing trade hubs like Hormuz from the Portuguese Empire also boosted the economy. So one of the few cases where we actually have our two empires, well, not one of a few cases, it happens quite frequently, but our two empires in this episode interacting here under Abbas I's lifetime. As for some differences, however, with their context and challenges, so João II's primary challenge was the internal nobility, which he subdued to centralize power. He operated in contexts where maritime exploration and expansion were key to economic success, leading to Portugal to the forefront of global trade. As for Abbas I, was faced on external threats from the Ottomans and Uzbeks, so internal threats versus external threats, as well as internal challenges from powerful tribal factions. So maybe Shah Abbas had both, whereas King João II was more focused on the internal. Well, they both, I would say maybe João II was relatively more focused on the internal. Abbas, no, it's impossible, because João II was really focused on external. So both of them were focused on internal, external, but maybe one was more in a naval way, and one was sort of more in a standing army way. But I'd say much more similar than different in this regard. So, but nonetheless, Abbas I faced external threats from Ottomans and Uzbeks. So maybe the external factors were a threat, whereas João II was sort of its own. They were the threat. They were the ones expanding. But ultimately, Shah Abbas II was successful in defeating, for a time, the Ottomans and the Uzbeks, as well as internal challenges from powerful tribal factions. His reign was marked by significant territorial expansion and consolidation within a land-based empire. So both expansion, but land-based versus water-based. As for their approaches to religion, João II, as a Catholic monarch, João II's reign did not focus on religious transformation within Portugal. However, he supported the spread of Christianity through missions in the newly discovered lands. Significant during his time was allowing for the division of South America, or perhaps maybe it was also very much to their best interest because they got the closer half in a very, very large region. Brazil is a massive region, for example. As for Abbas I made Twelver Shia Islam the state religion, so a significant influence in terms of religion and, for example, Iranian history to this day, distinguishing his empire religiously from its Sunni neighbors, establishing especially the Ottoman Empire, which was Sunni. His religious consolidation was a significant part of his strategy to unify the empire. So, for example, maybe a difference here is that for João II, it was the Spanish and Portuguese were both Catholic, so it was a mediation, whereas Shah Abbas the first, was he went against the grain. He went Shia rather than Sunni with the Ottomans, so divergent within religions from the potential threats. But I think it would have been impossible for João II to move away from Catholicism, even if he would have liked to, which I doubt he did. As for their cultural patronage, João II's reign laid the groundwork for the Portuguese Golden Age of exploration and trade. It was not particularly noted for cultural patronage. His contributions were more focused on exploration and economic reform, so not necessarily known for his cultural patronage. Abbas I, on the other hand, was a great patron of the arts and architecture. His transformation of Isfahan into a cultural and architectural marvel is one of his most enduring legacies. He actively promoted Persian culture, art, and architecture, leading to a renaissance in these fields, so significantly known for being a patron of the arts. As for diplomatic his transformation of Isfahan into a cultural and architectural marvel is one of his enduring legacies, and moving it as a capital was a significant change that João II did not necessarily do. He did not move the capital. As for their diplomatic relations, João II established diplomatic relations to secure and expand Portuguese trade networks. His treaties and alliances were often aimed at securing monopolies over key maritime trade routes and trade goods. So very significant, effective businessman in terms of creating monopolies, but not necessarily always ethical. But he did defend, for example, traders, so therefore maybe in some ways ethical. So nuance, however, let's not make an absolute judgment at this point. Abbas I in this regard is engaged in diplomatic relations, but his focus was broader. He sought alliances to counter Ottoman influence, engaged in trade negotiations with European powers, and used diplomacy to secure military support and economic benefits. So perhaps, allegedly, maybe he had a broader focus of diplomatic relations, whereas King João II maybe did not necessarily need to, and only did so to improve his economy, being perhaps maybe one of the most powerful colonial power maybe at that time. As for their respective legacies, João II is remembered for his centralization of power, economic reforms, and contributions to the age of exploration. His efforts laid the groundwork for Portugal's maritime empire and subsequent Golden Age. As for his impact, his reign has marked the beginning of Portugal's dominance in global trade and exploration, establishing a network that would influence global commerce for centuries. As for Abbas I, he is celebrated for his military victories, centralization efforts, and cultural contributions. His reign marked the peak of the Safavid Empire's power and cultural achievement. So King João II wasn't quite at the peak, it was right inspired the Golden Age, where Shah Abbas I was right at the peak. Furthermore, Abbas I transformed Iran into a unified, powerful state with a distinct Shia identity, leaving a lasting impact on Persian culture and the geopolitical landscape of the region. So thus, King João II and Shah Abbas I were both transformative rulers who significantly shaped the destinies of their empires. While João II focused on exploration, trade, and naval power to establish Portugal as a global maritime power, Abbas I concentrated on military reforms, cultural patronage, and economic revitalization to consolidate and expand the Safavid Empire. Both rulers, through their centralization of power and strategic reforms, left lasting legacies that defined their respective nations for generations. So two very, very fascinating leaders, some nitpicky things. João II is the second to his name. Abbas I is the first to his name. João II, his title was the Prince Perfect. Abbas I was the Great, so great both significant names, but take what you will of the differences there. Both of them did come from the royal lineage. Both their fathers were the kings or the monarchs, the king or the shahs, respectively. But in the case of Abbas I, he actually had to kill his own father. And furthermore, the succession after Abbas wasn't as successful, whereas after João II, sort of the golden age continued. But nonetheless, neither of them founded their empires, and neither of them lost their empires. So that is the fascinating, in my opinion, Portuguese Empire, the Empire of Portugal, and the Safavid Empire, and King João II and Shah Abbas I, respectively. This is episode 57 of Ages of Empires. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for your support, and I'll be very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.